Welcome back to Broadsheets, a political panel show here on Quays TV. Today I'm joined by Ben Cook and Alfie Garner. Thank you both for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sam. Pleasure to be here.
So today we'll be discussing a bit more than the past week in politics, particularly with Donald Trump becoming the US president yet again as the 47th, as well as the pretty notable events of this week, including Rachel Reev's big speech. But first of all, we're going to start off with today being a bit significant day in British politics, particularly for one man, and that one man being Boris Johnson. Today is 5 years since Brexit went through. And it's interesting to note that new statistics have shown, well, do either of you remember the original Brexit referendum, the outcome of that?
It was close. It was 52 to 48 in favour of leave. And it was all hailed by the likes of Nigel Farage as a big win for UK bureaucracy. And then the following years ensued, and many trade talks with the EU led to a long delay in the exit of the UK from the EU. But it happened 5 years ago.
Yeah, and the latest statistics, quite from just about a week ago, show that 55% of people in the UK think it was wrong to leave the EU, whereas 30% think it was right to leave. So it just depends where people were.
Yeah, I think that when you have a referendum whereby the outcome is so close, nearly 50-50, it's always a bit of a recipe for disaster, because the country is always going to be, so polarised, isn't it, in its views. And it's been now 5 years since we left, and the actual sort of referendum started was at 2016. And for me, that seems crazy, because I feel like we in this country are just still so much feeling the effects of Brexit, and maybe COVID did have a part to play in this, but I feel like the economy is still feeling the effects so much that it seems like it only happened yesterday, because I don't know how much further towards resolution we are. We left with a very bare bones deal, didn't we? I mean, that led to Theresa May, being, she had to step down because the deal was sort of deemed to be that bad. So yeah, I don't know how far we've moved on into sort of establishing ourselves outside of the EU very well and very strongly.
I mean, it's impacted how the political system works here in the UK with what the parties value. I know the Lib Dems manifesto pledged to rejoin the EU. With if they came in power from this summer election, that would have been a quick turnaround from leaving to then rejoining. But then the rejoining process, or even the joining process, could take a long time. You mentioned the economy, Ben, which is our first point for today. So Rachel Reev's speech, was it Wednesday morning? Yeah, Wednesday morning. She made her big announcement for her huge plans for growth. And it's about an expansion for a runway at Heathrow, this Europe Silicon Valley between Cambridge and Oxford, and redevelopment project for Old Trafford. What are your thoughts on this? Is this too ambitious to be making in the early days of a premiership?
Well, I think it's a very ambitious plan. And I think if they can pull it off, then it's going to be great. But they're going to need a lot of money and a lot of backing and a lot of changes to sort of, planning rights and permissions, which they've said that they are sort of going to do, that, they can no longer afford to wait around in the rigorous processes that it takes to get planning applications approved. It's sort of a drain of resources and money. I think that... I'm just glad that someone owns up and talk about accountability for how sluggish the growth in the economy has been. That was my first thing, which I thought, this is really great that she said, growth has been too slow. It's been sluggish, and we need to really change it. She's sort of took the bull by the horns and really took accountability of it. So yeah, I think if they can deliver, then yes, it would be great. The plans do seem to make sense, and they do seem ambitious and quite considerably well thought out.
Yeah, but the speech, a lot of media reported on the speech being about the third runway at Heathrow. It contained so much other things that are so vital to what Labour want, which is growth in the economy. It included vast and mass change to the planning permission laws that currently prevent a lot of building in the UK. They're changing how Greenbelt works and recategorising some of it to grey belt. They're changing, actually, one of the biggest things I thought of was they're changing the environmental regulations so people can build as long as they pay into a fund that Labour has created. Whether or not campaigners like Greenpeace will like that is something to be discussed, but it's unlikely because what it seems like is pay us a little bit of money, put it into this pot, and we'll plant a few trees so you can build a few houses. Whereas a lot of climate campaigners will say that's not the best way to have or prevent global warming, because in reality, for a lot of people, that's a PR stunt. It's a way to get pictures into the press. It's a way to make it seem like they're doing more than they actually are, whereas the best way to prevent irreversible climate change is to prevent additional work that isn't needed. A lot of this is, don't get me wrong, so additional housing and chances like in Oxbridge to have this sort of arc of growth is needed, but there's some of this that could go without and have still as much change if they invested in the right sort of places. One of them was an AI data centre. AI is going to take over the world, but the climate impact of that is enormous. Like for every 5 searches you do, I think it's every 5 searches you do on OpenAI, it takes a bottle of water out of the world. So it's like that sort of thing of, yes, we're going to go for the future and go for what matters, but it also kind of goes against climate policies that we've known for the last sort of 15, 20 years.
Yeah, I think what I got from Rachel Reeves' speech and the Labour government is that they just want to go hell for leather on these plans, and the environment did seem to be the bottom of the priority. And it caused a lot of division in the Labour Party as well. Obviously, Sadiq Khan and Ed Miliband are sort of not super in favour, or they do have concerns about how this is going to fit into the sort of the standards that the government have for, their sort of carbon budget. But just talking about the Oxbridge and Cambridge, this new Silicon Valley, when I first read it, I thought I know what Old Trafford Stadium might be getting a refurb, but why can't there be a Silicon Valley in the north? Why can't we create something like that here? Why, there's been long discussion about how the wealth isn't evenly distributed throughout the country and it all sort of, it is plunged into the south. And then I thought, well, actually, we actually in Oxford and Cambridge have some of the world's greatest minds. We have the most prestigious universities, and maybe, and a lot of the problems is in Oxford and Cambridge is the most least affordable cities to live in the UK. So people who are super intelligent, who might want to work across Oxford and Cambridge and within those areas, they probably can't afford to buy a house there. Transport there probably isn't easy. I mean, the transport links there just aren't great. And, to get via train from between Oxford and Cambridge is 2.5 hours. And to me, that seems crazy because for me to get from Liverpool to London, where I used to live, it was 2 hours. So, Liverpool is more well connected to London. It'd be easier for me to work and commute from Liverpool to London than it would be from people from Oxford and Cambridge. And also there's going to be a lot of new water reservoirs built. I think there's going to be 7 new ones in the Oxford and Cambridge areas. Or there's one in Somerset as well. I think that Rachel Reeves is really trying to do things that have had no attention in years. I don't think we've had any new reservoirs built I think since the 90s, and we haven't had another runway built in the last 80 years.
The runway's been contentious for a while.
Yeah.
In 2016, the BBC issued a report. This is when there was rumours, again, under the Conservative government, of the Heathrow expansion and the environmental costs of this. And it included suggestions that the government would provide parkland of a 150 million plan to transform a green area near the airport. So it's whether, there was accusations immediately after the speech that the Labour Party with Rachel Reeves had taken these promises and ideas from other parties in the previous government. So ultimately, coming off from this section, do you think that this is a Labour success, or have they been taking this from the Conservatives?
I think we have to be careful whether it's a Labour success, because it becomes a political battleground at Heathrow, because every time there's an election or every time that one party shifts to opposition, the opposition party will always say, what's the climate issue? We can't do it. We can't do it. We can't afford to do it. The climate can't afford it. But then when they get into power, they're like, oh, but it's really important for growth and the expansion of homes as ever-growing population increases. So what we've seen from both parties is when they're in power, they say, this is a really good thing for Britain. And then when they go into opposition, this is a really bad thing for Britain. But the speech itself, whether or not it was a success, a lot of it came down to the projects. We don't know if it's going to be a success until the projects start. A lot of the time it's going to be, okay, you can say this and say this and say this, but you need to put the spade in the ground for it to actually have an effect. One thing that was mentioned a lot was the North. So it was, she kind of went on to this sort of idea of the Northern Powerhouse, something that the Conservatives started to run with towards the end of their term in office. But she failed to mention anything about HS2 in the North, which was cancelled by the Conservatives, which would greatly increase growth both in the North, but also connect London better to places like Manchester, like Leeds, two places that Rachel Reeves really talked about as a Northern powerhouse. She did, however, say that they were continuing their TransPennine scheme and some of the projects started by the Conservatives for the Northern Rail projects. But they're sort of minor improvements in the grand scheme of things when it comes to moving stuff up to the north, like many companies are starting to do, because it's cheaper, and also it integrates better for the UK because it's in the centre of the country rather than at the real bottom where London is, the capital.
And she's also expressed interest in sort of reviving Doncaster Airport that was closed just before the pandemic, hasn't she? And really making that a hub for sort of flights going in and out in a really, international sort of centre of business and trade. Just about the third runway expansion, I think it's easy for, maybe even me especially to sit here, living in Liverpool where nothing's really going to be affected by this, to say it's going to be good and it's going to be, all for the growth of the economy, but sort of taking the environmental sort of concerns even out of it. There is villages around Heathrow that are probably going to see half of their village or local community demolished for this. That could be their church hall, their church, their children's local schools, more importantly, their home. And then there's also the villages and communities that are on the flight path. The noise, the pollution is going to be a little more than annoying for them. So I can say, I think it would be, anyone raising concerns about this, especially from them communities. I don't know if it's fair to just label them as NIMBYs, you know what I mean? Because it's going to have a huge, huge effect.
Yes, exactly. But this is so... Alfie, you mentioned this is something that the government changed their mind on. Well, what many do when they come into power, they change their mind to focus on their own growth. And talking of how this could affect the Labour Party in government, their reputation across the world, do you think including a new a new runway could help attract more business promises? That's one option that's been created.
It will, in the short term, for sure, bring in that growth that Labour talks about, because it's going to bring in, according to Rachel Reeves...
Short term only, though.
Short term, yeah. It's going to bring in thousands of jobs as they build it, and it will take about 5-10 years to build
100,000 jobs.
100,000 jobs.
Sort of estimating, aren't they?
But after that, whether or not it will bring in business is a different story, because Heathrow is a very crowded airport. But they've also seen opportunities for change in the past, where they've closed Terminal 1. That's now a hub for sort of logistics. Whether or not a third runway would add to the pressure of the current terminals and whether Terminal 1 will have to reopen, that's a different issue. It will come to whether or not business actually wants to be in the UK. Rachel Reeves talked a lot about business is starting to arrive from international places and from emerging areas. And as a hub airport, yes, Heathrow's in the best place to offer that. But whether or not a third runway would actually help with that is something that I very much doubt, because Heathrow has about, I think the stats are about one flight every 20 seconds or something entering and leaving the airport. The third runway would only add to that. It wouldn't take the stress off the other airport, of the other runways. It would just add for the potential for British BA or Virgin or American Airlines to just increase their passenger numbers potentially.
Yeah. And also going back to Brexit's seen a lot of businesses registering in other places. A lot of businesses registered in Ireland because it was easy to get imports and exports without like sort of heavy tariffs, and a lot of people started registering in even Australia and sort of the Middle East, Dubai, countries like that. So that is also just linking it back to Brexit. That's also sort of seen a bit of a shift away from, business in the UK. I think Heathrow at the minute is sort of like running to capacity, isn't it? I think it's nearly exceeding the sort of its flight limits. And I think by this third terminal, Rachel Reeves, she has got ambitious plans to probably turn the UK into a major centre for trade and business. So she's probably just estimating that a lot more people would have the opportunity to do business in the UK with more flights being able to come in and out. But it is not going to come without consequences, not only to the environment, but as we say, to the people in the communities. So it's going to be, I'm interested to see how it all goes.
All right, thank you both. We're just going to fly across the pond for the next story. Donald Trump has been the president for his second time for a week and a half now it is. A lot's already happened. He had a phone call with Starmer in which, did he have one or two? I certainly had one, but I know he's going to meet the Prime Minister. But in their phone call, they hadn't discussed the new ambassador to the UK, well, the new UK ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson, who served in various roles such as the MP for Hartlepool, and he was key for the new Labour election win in 1997. So he's been approved by Donald Trump as a UK ambassador to the US. But on Tuesday, there were reports from US officials that they handed in a document of Mandelson's business links to China. Mandelson is anti-Brexit and supports more cooperation with China. How could the UK and US relation pan out?
Well, Alfie, this is funny, isn't it? Because we on a show on Shock Radio, which is sort of, what is it, Sam? Would that be like our partner network? Yeah. Is it fair to say? And we were discussing this, weren't we? And this hadn't come out at that point, so we were speculating about how the US and UK sort of special relationship was going, and I was a little bit sceptical because, I just felt like we've just seen sort of reform cozy up to the Republican Party under Donald Trump, and sort of I was just getting the sense that like Donald Trump, and especially those higher up in his sort of cabinet, were just trying to block Keir Starmer and the Labour Party out and sort of act like they didn't exist. But obviously, I think the day after, we had a huge U-turn because it come out that Donald Trump had said that he thinks Keir Starmer has done a great job so far and he's looking forward to work with him. So we did see how it's sort of panning out now. I think Peter Mandelson, I'm not surprised at the Labour Party appointing him, because to me, Peter Mandelson, sort of like, when I think of Mandelson, it screams out to me sort of like old Blairite Labour. Do you know what I mean? A sort of cornerstone of the Labour Party, very experienced as a politician. But it is very surprising, not really surprising, more interesting how Peter Mandelson has gone from saying it was something like Donald Trump is short of a white nationalist and racist, to now he's gone back on it all and said he was ill-judged. It just seems, what's gone on to make Peter sort of have this U-turn? Well, actually, I know what might have gone on. He kind of likes his appointment as the American ambassador, and it comes with a lot of perks and a lot of parties where you can wine and dine, and a nice, big, beautiful estate in Washington. So I think Peter is probably, and after Peter's took a step back in a lot of he's sort of been on the peripheral for ages, and now at 71 years old, he's under this new Labour government. He's really diving back in, so I'm sure he's probably happy about that.
Well, that's the big thing you mentioned it there is the whole reason why this has exploded is because of his past comments about Donald Trump. He
said he was a danger to the world, didn't he?
Danger to the world, and then he had to go back on that after this appointment. But whether or not he'll have constraints on the US relationship, I don't think it would. I think at the moment the US and UK relationship is strong. The Keir Starmer has said, as well as Rachel Reeves, that the relationship between the US and the UK will remain strong. They want it to remain strong because they like how it's positioned and how it's working out. But whether or not Peter Mandelson's the right person for the job, he's, as he said, it's very anti-Brexit. He's very cozying up to sort of China and much of that side of the world. And Donald Trump doesn't really like that because he's very much America first. America has, in his view, some of the best products and the best manufacturing in the world. He, in the election campaign, said he was going to put really high tariffs on China. He was going to sort of make sanctions against China for the American people. So whether or not the Donald Trump administration would like the fact that Peter Mandelson actually is more closely linked to China is something that we will discover. But for Donald Trump and his administration to say they're also happy with Peter Mandelson because the experience he has and the sort of political connections that he has within Labour, but also within the US, is a really interesting thing because it will see the US relationship with the UK change as sort of both countries have differing ideas. Whether or not that will infect the Labour Party or the Republican Party in the US will be something to see over the next sort of 5 years. But again, this isn't guaranteed to work out. We're not going to see Donald Trump go, okay, I really don't like how this is working. He hasn't really got a choice.
Yeah,
he kind of has to work with the Peter Mandelson no matter what.
How do you both predict it will turn out with Peter Mandelson being very pro business with China, and then this week we heard about DeepSeek, and we heard Biden in his administration saying that the USA would be, ahead in AI, and then China have done, they've made their own AI app called DeepSeek, which now Italy is actually blocked in the past, this morning. If Mandelson is pro relationships with China and wants a cooperation with him, how could that affect Donald Trump's likening towards Mandelson?
Well, I was just reading something then. So it has been a huge U-turn because an aide to Donald Trump has actually called Peter Mandelson a moron in the past who should go home. I mean, that's the level that we were sort of at. In terms of what's going on with China and sort of their new AI, one thing that I will say about Donald Trump, I think that you've got to admire, is he's not scared of no one, and he believes he is the best and he will be the best, and he's not intimidated. So the minute China is appearing to have a more superior AI than America, he goes straight to a press conference and he says we need to up our game and we have to be the best. He's not intimidated by China. I think the UK slightly, we can get a little intimidated by Russia and by China, but he's not even, he told President Putin that he needs to end this ridiculous war or he'll put sanctions and higher tariffs on him. So he literally isn't afraid to stand up to anyone in that sort of way. I think in terms of the relationship, though, sort of what Alfie was saying, it's like we can have all these discussions about, like Keir Starmer and Donald Trump on a personal level. They just might not get on, or Peter Mandelson, as called Donald Trump a danger to the country, and then the Republican Party have called Mandelson a moron. But at the end of the day, I think everyone, no matter what party is in the UK or the States, all recognise the fundamental importance of the special relationship. And I think that's it. They do have no choice. So I think that's why we're seeing the backpedaling now, where, we've got Peter Mandel saying things like he thinks Donald Trump is if only we would have known what a nice and fair-minded person he would turn out to become. He said that he thinks he's one of the most consequential American presidents he's ever seen in his adult life. And for Peter Mandelson to say that is no fair footing because he's seen a lot in terms of politics. But, Peter Mandelson has never been a stranger to scandal and, sort of questionable relationships with Russian oligarchs. Donald Trump's whole cabinet seems to be a lot of oligarchs now, so maybe they'll get on well.
Potentially. But the issue on AI is a big one for the US economy because it's starting to become reliant on AI. OpenAI, massive company out of Silicon Valley. And they have sort of a powerhouse, sort of monopoly over the AI industry because of how popular it's become with the average folk rather than industry within America. For when it comes to the AI that's been built in China, a lot of it comes down to whether the AI is useful. And there's been reports online that people using this AI to ask it questions about the Chinese government has just come back with, sorry, I'm not capable of answering that right now. So it will have an effect. It will definitely sort of weaken or strengthen the sort of differences between the US and China. But whether or not it will change the AI industry, probably won't, because again, OpenAI has this massive impact. You have these data centers, they have all this ready to go. They just need basically to improve and keep going, which they are going to do as the AI revolution happens. So it's very well and good that China can make their own, but it won't have the impact that OpenAI has because it's already limited by sort of Chinese speech laws. Whether or not, so you didn't say any criticism about what's happening in America or what's happening in China, whereas OpenAI kind of just does it anyway because it's how the model's being trained already.
So going back, you just mentioned that AI in America, especially growth by their Silicon Valley, with the plans for the Europe Silicon Valley in Cambridge, Oxford area, could potentially the UK become a figure in this AI race?
I think it could, but again, it wouldn't have the power that the US has. The US has such broad space where they've not built on anything. That's a place where data centers are going to be vital, where they can actually get away with building these data centers because no one's really affected by it in the immediate area. The UK will sort of have the knowledge and the sort of education and the background to be able to influence what's happening in the US, but I don't think it'll have the sort of space and the actual resource to be able to. It could offer services to companies like OpenAI for their training and their AI training, but whether or not it will have an impact overall, it'll be like China, I reckon. It'll be like China because it'll be that the US already has the head start in the AI revolution.
I was going to say, we would just be playing catch-up, wouldn't we?
Yeah, we're playing catch-up, and we'll always be playing catch-up with the US in this sector. So it's whether or not do we look towards using AI for something else, for other industries, or is it going to be a case of we're just going to follow the US, hope for the best, and just see how it goes? It's something that will definitely be coming into question over the next 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a huge growth in AI, isn't there? And I mean, it's sort of we were all, when it first started gaining prominence, we were all so scared about, is it going to take over? Is it going to become smarter than us? And I think there's also big concerns about, are we going to become, like, forgive the word, but like dumber as a society because
more reliant on AI.
Yeah, well, like I mean, I'm finding myself slipping into those habits now. Like I sort of, if I'm sort of like applying for a job and I'll write down, my sort of email draft to an employer, but I will sort of like put it through AI and say, make this sound better. Do you know what I mean? Or make this sound more like free flowing. Do you know what I mean? And sort of, and if I need to know something quick, I will just ask AI. And sometimes I worry and I think, like, could this even lead to, if we're not working our brains properly, could it lead to, increased rates of dementia in the future? There's so many ways this could go. And I think, as the point Alfie touched on, it's being not only sort of used by these big companies, but it's becoming real. The point I'm trying to make is it's becoming sort of commonplace in the lives of the everyday man.
Yeah, certainly. So AI has turned out to be quite a divisive topic, as has Priti Patel's comment she made this week about immigration and in defence after she was on Talk TV and said she was not happy about the levels of immigration under the previous Conservative government, and they had not met their migration targets. And her spokesperson in defence said that while the last Conservative government may have tried to control numbers, we did not deliver. So Priti Patel hasn't really been in the spotlight recently, and Badenoch came out to sort of rebuke Patel. But if we were to look at the UK political system, has it changed? Are we still looking at Badenoch's party?
Well, I think what Priti Patel's basically said is she's sort of we've been under sort of the Conservative rule for the last 14 years, and towards the end that immigration was at like a high, an all-time high. And what Priti Patel has tried to say is she's tried to sort of paint a bit of a better light on it. She said that, you know, the last government only let the bestest and brightest people in, whatever that means. So she's sort of tried to say it was better than it was. And Kemi Badenoch, I think she is really trying to establish herself as a new leader of the Conservative Party who wants to take it in a completely different direction, who wants to really own the mistakes of the past government and make it clear how she is going to bring things forward. So I think that's why she was very keen to rebuke that and you know, sort of say, no, that weren't the case. But by the next election, me and my party, Kemi Badenoch Conservative, is going to have a firm plan in place for immigration that we can bring to the British people and that we can show them that we will work to solve it.
Well, that's one thing that was mentioned in PMQs this week. Is Kemi Badenoch actually going to lead the Conservatives into the next election? Keir Starmer doubts it. Some on the Conservative side also doubt it. And you said it there. Priti Patel is sort of already setting herself up as the next leader for the Conservatives. But it also comes down to what she said in the speech and what she said in the statement afterwards. She kind of went back and was like, I still don't like how our party handled immigration, but is Labour doing any better? Have they had the chance to do any better? She kind of just rebuked what she said and kind of just went back on it. I was like, well, we didn't do very well, but neither is Labour. Look at Labour. Look at what Labour's doing. Whether or not it will help Kemi Badenoch and the Conservative Party, they're already sort of Labour up and down in the polls at the moment. They're not really consistent in where they're staying like they were before the election.
I mean, Keir Starmer's disapproval rates peaked this week.
Yeah, so we'll see that happen because of the different policies he brings out. But whether or not that will be the same in 5 years, it won't. It will most definitely be different. Whether or not it will be Kemi Badenoch or the Conservatives in general that are the ones who sort of take the mantle and be like, right, we're ones for power, whether or not it'll be Reform, whether or not it'll be someone like a Green Party coalition with Labour, is something to see. But I don't reckon it'll be a case of Conservatives just going to get straight back in, because I think people will remember the 14 years they had in their last terms in office. So I think it'll definitely be a battle between Reform and Conservatives, not a battle between Labour and Conservatives next election.
Yeah, I was reading this morning and I thought I can see, you know, I think Conservatives are going to be wise now to see their closest competition as Reform. I think Kemi Badenoch knows this. I think she knows that the Conservative Party were absolutely battered at the end of this this general election that's just been. And considering it's just crazy how Keir Starmer won by such a landslide, but his disapproval ratings went up so quickly. I think that Kemi Badenoch is trying to really put herself as someone who'll own the mistakes of the past. And a spokesperson, when Priti Patel made these comments, a spokesperson for Kemi Badenoch said, when Kemi said she was committed to a hard cap on the visas in November under her leadership, as the Conservative Party will tell the truth about the mistakes that they made. So she is sort of keen to own that immigration, you know, was not was not where it should have been, and there was record highs. You know, in the summer of 23, we'd seen, you know, more immigration than ever before. So yeah, I think just for the sake of her reputation, trying to rebuild the Conservative Party, it's been very important that she does reboot Priti Patel. It's kind of like nonsensical what she said, isn't it? It was a lie. It was a lie.
Do you think that all the parties are going to use immigration as a topic pretty soon as sort of a battleground for debate?
Well, I think Reform have built an identity on
100%.
immigration, haven't they?
It'll be 100% because it always causes an issue. Every election within sort of the last 10, 15 years, it's been immigration as the forefront. You know, Conservatives used it as a case of, look at what it's doing. We're always trying to stop the boats. We're trying to constrict, whereas Labour went about it was they're not doing good enough. We need to do more. Reform went absolutely no. Net zero immigration is what the term they used. So it will always be something that is used by the parties as sort of a fighting pin between them. Whether or not the UK actually cares about it, they care about it, but for a lot of people, it's not number one. A lot of people care more about the economy or the cost of living and whether they can get a secure job. And then you'll have the parties like Reform and be like, but the people coming over are taking your jobs. Whether or not the people voting are believing that is something else. It comes into question. It will be a very big topic next election. It won't be number one, that's for certain.
Yeah, I think, you know, Alfie's right. I think people are struggling to sort of stay afloat, pay the rent and put food on the table. So who's crossing the borders is of little importance when, you know, your main priority is just getting food on the table, staying afloat. I think just in terms of immigration, it was interesting what Kemi Badenoch said. She was on Sky News and she was sort of saying that she thinks we should start treating immigration in sort of a class-based way. And she believes that we should be, you know, sort of, these were her exact words, a wealthy French doctor should be sort of prioritised and maybe treated with more lenience in terms of immigration than, you know, someone who would be unskilled, you know, from somewhere else. So that was quite interesting. I thought that's quite an interesting way of her proposing to deal with immigration. And yeah, I think what's happening now is I think immigration is becoming unmanageable, and that's the problem. Because I think immigration has been something that the UK has welcomed for a long time and been really open to, and it's never been as big as an issue now because people were immigrating in manageable numbers, and it was and those numbers made it more easy for them to integrate into our communities, which has got to be what it's all about. It's got to be about us all integrating together. Do you know what I mean? Acceptant and lenient of all cultures, but also realising that, you know, in the UK, we do have certain standards that we live by, that, you know, if you come to this country, you sort of have to an extent fit in line with. And I think now what we're seeing is with sort of these record number highs of immigration, what's happening is there's a lot of people and they're all forming their own separate communities, and that's not the way it should be. We should all be, you know, forming one community here in the UK. So I think that is where we're sort of going wrong.
So to take this full circle back to how we started the episode, with Brexit, that's been the major point since immigration's been on everyone's mind as a major topic of what is political debate and just, you know, community discussion. So would future discussions, especially current discussions about Brexit, it's the anniversary today, do you think obviously immigration is going to be more on the minds of people as, you know, Brexit debates continue with rejoining EU tariff groups?
I think it will. A major part of Brexit was getting our country back. That's what Nigel Farage uses, get our country back. And that's sort of what a lot of them, they say immigration comes down to, we want our country back, we want our freedom back. So immigration will always be a massive part to play in any EU discussion because of the sort of free travel between EU countries. But there is ways to sort of go about it where we can rejoin the EU in full and still not have to comply to that section of EU membership. Whether or not the Labour Party, if they ever rejoin the EU, whether the Lib Dems, when they said they wanted to rejoin in the EU in the last election, said that'd be the best way. It could be that they just rejoin the single market, the free market, or whether or not they go for full EU membership, have sort of voting right in the EU, is something that will be discussed, because it's something that a lot of people care deeply about. Is, you know, Brexit has a massive impact on the UK economy, but being in the EU had a massive impact on the global economy. So people like Labour are usually more sympathetic to that, because they like the idea of globalisation. They like the idea of sort of one world, because it makes it easier. It works well for imports and exports. Whereas you'll see people like Reform and the Conservatives, where they believe one nation is better than the globalisation sort of front. So it will become an important discussion. But immigration will just sort of be embedded in that, because a lot of people see the EU as, okay, people are just going to come into the UK, whereas there's deeper conversations about whether or not it will have the impact that a lot of people think it does.
Yeah, I think sort of, and Sam, you mentioned it in context of immigration. I think hardline Brexiteers and I think Reform are sort of putting this rhetoric forward that, you know, we are an island on our own in Great Britain, and we're a sort of island of great historical and cultural significance, and coming out of the EU, we will be able to control everything. We'll be able to control our own borders, and it'll be very much like that. But it just hasn't panned out that way. It's still all a bit of a mess, and as we've said time and time again on this show alone, immigration is been up, you know, to considerable highs. So it didn't really stop immigration. They didn't really get a good control on the borders.
Well, thank you both for all the information you've given me today, and thank you both for joining me on the panel.
Thank you very much, Sam. It was a pleasure.
Always a pleasure to be here.
And I'll be here next week for your next episode of Broadsheets. Have a nice night.